it's turned off, the volume decreases. So when you turn it on in order to speak, and you probably will, because your voice is even softer than mine, then you just push the button and it will increase the volume.
Thank you. I don't know what I did.
Yours will do the same thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just need to, Google it.
It's not the discussing anything.
This echoing will be stopped in a second. This is.
No, we're gonna start the meeting with them.
He comes late frequently, so.
We do have a quorum.
Okay.
Hang on 1 second, let me get everything posted. I am posting the stream live on Facebook and website here in a moment. All right. I'm logging into WordPress now, not quite yet, sorry. Yeah, yeah. This is not.
I really have cat got a haircut. I did it myself.
Nice.
Okay.
Is that Tim coming in now?
Nice job. I was debating doing that and I thought.
That was
Lord,
very
before
good.
you're gonna
Back
go.
to TV. This took about like an hour. I'm not efficient, so.
Are you set, Julie?
I'm waiting for a computer for notes and then I will set, get that one to log in. Thank you very much. The word on here, or do you use?
On Firefox.
You need to get into that. Oh, I can use it that way, yeah. Okay.
We have 3 budget committee members who are remote, so you'll see their faces appear.
You're looking right at my bald spot.
Well, the camera's right in the middle of us, and they'll see you, but you won't see them.
Don't you want to
Post the link on the website.
see them? And it'll be there.
It's already copied, so you
Tim
can
will
paste
be
it
there,
into
yeah.
the post, so you can stream, that's where we advertise it would be. We need about 1 minute.
It's difficult for me to turn around on a rate on a sustained basis. I'll tell you the story of when my wife broke my neck Sunday,
She did, how did you do that?
daring me into stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. Told me she was tougher than I was, and turned out she was.
We never had a doubt.
But,
We never had a doubt.
no, actually, I never really had a doubt either, but I couldn't turn down the dare.
Okay, I am ready. That is as ready as she needs to be, so we're ready to go.
Okay, we're gonna call the meeting to order. And I'd like to take a roll call, and the people who are not here physically, after the roll call, could you mute your phones so that we're not getting a lot of background noise until you're ready to talk? That would be a huge help. Okay, I'm Pat Piper, I'm chair. Respond by saying here. Peggy Gergen? Here. Judy? Here. Ted?
Here.
Olheim is absent, or,
He's absent.
yeah, he's absent. Tim?
Here.
Karen?
Here.
Alita?
Here.
Dick?
Here.
Loretta? Here. All right. Thank you all for showing up. We really appreciate that. So we have the board and the appointed budget committee. Could you take a look at the agenda? Do you have any comments? This would be the time to make them.
Pat, the only comment I would make is that we'll probably combine 7 and 8 because we'll do discussion as we proceed through the documents.
Okay. And I want to call your attention to the blue sheet that we got, which refers to the key points of ORS 294.414-458. It talks about the key points for the budget committee meeting. Take a look at it. If you have any comments, let me know. We need to elect a budget committee chair, and even though I'm the budget committee chair now, we need to, if somebody else would like to take that position over.
I would move that Pat Piper continue as the budget committee chair.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Right.
Thank you very much for
I
that.
think it's over here.
It is.
This is,
What numbers do we have?
what number is this one?
The higher level.
Top down. One. Sorry, we're fixing some feedback issues in here, guys, for you that are not here.
We don't have any
Now on
members.
5. Are you still
Well,
hearing it?
check it out, let's see it.
Are you still hearing it now?
That's better, thank you.
And it's projecting, okay? I can hear you.
Okay, we don't have any members of the public here. Were there any comments mailed in or emailed?
No comments received.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. Budget message and budget document presentation.
All right, we have some work to do, so let's get to it. Anyone who writes a budget message has their own style for doing it. There are 3 requirements. One must be, are you raising your hand?
I was fidgeting.
One must be that it discusses fiscal operations for the district. The second one is that it must have something to do with the budget. And the third is that it must have something to do with the budget changes. My particular style is to divide it into 3 sections, as you've noticed. A prologue, which actually highlights financial operations. And then the main budget message, which deals with the budget and budget changes. And there are some financial operation details in there as well. And then the final epilogue just gives you a few other tidbits to think about. So the process that I would like to use, if you have both the budget message and the budget document in front of you at the same time, because we'll go back and forth between the 2. I will make some comments or point out some highlights to you. And before we leave a page or a section, then I'll ask you if you have questions or comments that you want to add. Rather than do a whole presentation and wait till the end, it's easier to discuss it when it's fresh in your brain. So any comments before we begin? Hearing none, let's go. In the prologue, in the budget message, under the Department of Revenue, I would just call your attention to the fact that the treasurer and the bookkeeper attended the Department of Revenue budget training. I will say it's probably the best one that I've been to. The 2 trainers really highlighted tidbits and ideas about developing a budget that, quite frankly, I haven't heard before, so it was very helpful. And as show and tell, I will just show you that indeed, they produce a budget manual. And I know that it's different for this year than it was last year because when I punched holes in it and put it in, I looked at each page, and indeed it's different. So good for them. They did a good job. Under Curry County Treasurer, I would also just mention that as of September 2019, the tax payments that come to the library district are now transferred by direct deposit to the local government investment pool general fund. And thanks to Debbie Crumley, the county treasurer, for facilitating that process. And I would just mention too that Debbie is retiring at the end of June. Sorry, to hear her go, because she's been a good helper, always there when you have questions.
How long has she been in that
Do
position?
you know, I don't know, I looked,
Didn't she take over for Trudy?
she took, who was Trudy the person before?
Yeah, where there's a lot of, yeah. Oh, well, that's good.
Anyway, however
3
long-
years or something, 3 or 4
Yeah,
years.
I think it's more than that, but I'm not positive. Anyway, she has decided to retire, so, we'll miss her. Under county clerk, when Julie and I were doing some research this year, for past history, it was new information to us that the county clerk only keeps budgets for 2 years. We thought that records would be digitized or that we could access old records from past budgets. No, you can't. Don't go looking, you won't find them. The other thing that we learned from that was that banks only keep previous records for 7 years. So you can have a bank do research for those 7 years. It costs you a fairly large fee, but that's not a way you're gonna get history either. Also, under county clerk, I would just call your attention to the fact that special district elections are in odd years. So next year, 2021, we do have 2 library board positions that will be part of that election process. Under Umpqua Bank, we have tried to streamline our financial operations as much as we can. And that involved closing the money market account. There was really no reason to keep it open, particularly in light of transferring tax payments directly to state treasury. The other thing is that we have, in concert with our bookkeeper, created a number of auto pay. The bookkeeper also does some online payments. Anything that we pay by check has to be signed by 2 board authorized signatories. The other thing that's at the bank is the certificate of deposit, and that does mature during this next fiscal year. Under local government investment pool, I'm guessing that you know that that's handled through Oregon State Treasury. There have been a number of staff changes at the Treasury, but through newsletters and their publications, they have continued to assure us that our funds are being looked after quite well. So I put the definition of library improvement fund, which is the Department of Revenue definition, because that is why that fund was established and that's why it continues. So it's important for us to understand it is completely legal to do such a fund. The last thing on this page has to do with the audit process. An audit is required every year. Our audit from 18-19 had no deficiencies. Everything was just fine. We're very pleased for that. The auditor forwards it to the state along with the fee, and the board has already designated the same auditor for the current year. So at the end of this page, are there any comments or questions that we can handle? Anything to add, Julie? No. Okay, moving on. Then we're on to the main message, which means in your budget, you need to be on form LB10. LB just means local budget. The forms are generated by the Department of Revenue and are required for us to use. At the top of the budget message page, I have said, and I will highlight and probably say it more than once, this proposed budget that is in the right-hand column of all the budget pages is based on the best estimates available. And there are many times when Julie and I we have worked together. How did you get to that number? Because it is the best estimate we can come up with. All right, LB10 is dealing with the certificate of deposit, which is called the Meisner Fund. And the reason that name is in red is because we have finally found source documentation to spell that name correctly. So if you see it spelled any other way, it's not right, it's this way. We actually, the auditor, I will have to tell you this, we have been going round and round about spelling that name. And there is another Meisner in town that spells it differently. And the auditor actually supplied us a copy of the original letter from Clifford Meisner that established this fund. So source documents are good things. The other thing that I would point out about this, when you look at line 5 that says interest, the 325 is based on the current interest rate. I've said that it will mature in February. When I checked with the bank, the likelihood of us getting a 2-year CD is slim to none. The likelihood of us even getting a 1.65% is pretty slim, but that's what was currently offered. So that interest is based on the current rate plus that 1.65. If you see in the bottom half of the page, we transfer that money to the general fund in order for us to spend it. And as I've indicated in history, this can only be used for children's books. So the total requirements in that particular page are 15,325. 15 is the principal, and that's what stays. Any questions about this particular fund?
I just want to clarify that only the interest can be spent on
Correct.
children's books.
And this is not related, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are streaming live on YouTube, and it's posted on publicly, so I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. Should have said that at the beginning.
I forgot to say that.
Yes, that's important information.
Thank you. I'll try to control myself.
Yes, please.
Any questions about this one? The last piece of information that I would add then is, we just recently learned from the auditor that it is not required to spend that interest every year. In fiscal operations, it's a bit of a, how can I say it nicely? It's a bit of a pain because it's a small amount, and the way the interest is deposited directly to the checking account. But, and the bookkeeper can keep track of it, but the end of the year is when it gets to be a little bit of a pain, because then Julie has to track to spend it, and the bookkeeper has to make the adjustment to take into account that final interest payment. So at our next board meeting, I will be presenting to the board the fact that we could leave the interest in and allow it to accumulate. There is one more time in this budget process that we could change this if we wish to, and that will be following the budget hearing, which is now scheduled for May 22. It will be totally up to the board whether they choose to do that. If that's so, then we have the ability to change this page. Ready to move on? The next page would be another local budget form 10. And you notice that in the budget message, everything is in red because this is a brand new form. At the training with the Department of Revenue, we talked about grants with the trainers and told how we had been previously managing it. And the recommendation was that we use this particular form, which means it makes it more streamlined and better for the bookkeeper and actually for Julie and myself to track as well. So the asterisk at the top of the budget page is what we were advised to do, to say we previously had this on 2 other forms. It's now on this one. If you look at the top section, line 7, the ready to read grant is one that we currently have and have had for the past at least 3 years that I know of. And we estimate that the amount for that would be $2,200. Other grants under line 8, do you remember back at the top of the main message, I said on the best estimates available? That's totally what that number is. What it allows us to do is, if Julie or staff would write for a grant that is within that amount and it is received, the board can accept it via resolution. And because we have documented it on this particular budget form, we can spend during this fiscal year. So when you look at the bottom of the page, the total requirements in here, including that estimate and the ready to read, are 12,220. Any questions about this particular page? If you were going to ask what grants do you have in mind, the answer is don't know. Whatever might appear. All right.
Just a quick question to make sure I heard you correctly.
All right.
Alita, it's, so you were saying that the $10,000 is potentially if we write for a grant and request a grant up to that amount, we would be able to spend that amount if it were awarded.
Well, granted, if the funding were approved, the board would be able to accept that fund via resolution during the board meeting. And then that allows us to be able to spend it.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that
Yes.
clarified?
Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Thanks. Moving on to LB 11. And first of all, I would call your attention to the amount of red that's in the budget message. The reason for that is that I got above that something about the dates on this form just were not right. And it had been passed on year to year. And so I wanted to see source documentation that it was created and the resolution number, and started a whole series of events that weren't particularly fun for the Julie. Julie got involved in the process, and we do have source documentation. If you'll notice in the left-hand corner of the budget page, this fund was authorized and established, and the resolution number and the date of June 1, 2001 has been verified. And the purposes that are listed are absolutely in concert with Oregon law. So it indeed is a correct fund. The reason it was established was because the loan or certificates of participation in order to build this building that we're in were paid, the loan was paid, and the board at that time decided to continue to deposit that payment into a library reserve fund. And that's how it got established over the years. And remember, this fund then has been in operation and building for some 19 years. That money didn't just suddenly appear. The majority of the money is interest on the principal, and as you know, interest is a roller coaster, and that's what it's been. There were some donations and contributions over the years. I cannot find source documentation for a period of time, but we know from board meeting minutes that that's how the money got into this fund. I was able to get source documentation from the time the money was transferred into Oregon State Treasury, and the company that actually manages the online account was able to get monthly reports from March 13, 2013, up to the time that current ones are posted. So I could look at every month and document that, yes, that's the money that came into this fund. In 2011, because when you look on the right-hand upper side of this page, you see that reserve funds must be looked at and reviewed at least every 10 years. The board that was present in 2011 did that, and by resolution decided to continue to fund, and that was correct. The board can review it more frequently, but must do it every 10 years. Interestingly, as you can imagine, the interest rate has been a roller coaster this year. And as I noted, there have been 4 interest decreases, which affect this fund and the general fund, which is our operating money from state treasury. The current rate is 1.75. So when you look on the proposed budget on the budget document, line 5 that says interest, that's based on the lower rate. It's very possible that rate will decrease yet again. I have no clue when or how much, but we will not be surprised if that happens, which means then this interest amount would need to be recalculated. If you look down at the second half of the page, you see, wow, some big numbers. Following a main library internal inside audit by Third Way Incorporated, there are some recommendations about things that we can do inside our library to meet our strategic plan and actually be more customer friendly and more up to date in how we do it. That company, and again, Show and Tell, produced a very complete report for us. And David, who is the company president and the one who actually conducted the on-site review, met with the board via virtual Zoom meeting and went through every item in that report. The second thing that happened this year was we contracted with Rich Torrey. Some of you know him. In order for Julie to prepare a bit longer term than 12 months of what about this building needs to be maintained, he also came in person, did inside, outside, and prepared a detailed report, another show and tell for us, which allows Julie to be able to do that kind of projection. What needs to be done now? What needs to be done in the future? And did we go beyond 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah, he went real far. So for his planning, it was what will need to be done probably in the next 30 years.
Wow, that just went out of my head. That was too
Yeah.
far. I won't be around.
How often you
How often?
repaint the building, how often, so it could go potentially forever.
Anyway, it was very helpful to have that. The outcome of both of those audits was that there are things that we can do during this budget year, indeed using library improvement funds. So the estimates for both of those is where we come up with the $1,062,311. The other thing I will say about that amount to be spent is that we continue to work with Third Way. In fact, we're on the second phase of that already, being paid out of the current year's budget. And that means that David, in concert with designer, architect, Julie has already done a look through with video camera, because there are specific things that we want to do. Not everything in David's report is something that's going to be done, but it begins the next phase of the process. And yes, for that kind of renovation, it will require at least one RFP process, possibly more than one. The other project that is listed is in concert with a local nonprofit. The board has committed $105,000 to research and possibly a capital campaign in order to look at additional facilities. I'll let Julie explain more, but my preface to her comments would be the determination had already been made a number of years ago that adding to this particular building is not really feasible. There are many areas of concern. You can't add a second story. It's not meant to do that. Adding on in the parking lot area has its problems because of the requirement for a building of this size must have X number of parking spaces. So looking at this process in collaboration with the nonprofit has great advantage, not only to the community, but to us as well. Would you add to that?
I would. I guess in terms of both of these projects, really, they started with a realization that our current library building is not meeting community needs, not meeting library needs. And so the interior renovation is to maximize the space to the best of our ability. We have a large library building here and can do a lot better, I think, with the space than what we are doing. And a piece of that is we have a serious lack of meeting room and event space. And so the 2 meeting rooms that we do have are constantly booked. And we don't really have the capability, as Judy said, to expand the building outward. So part of the interior renovation is hopefully going to be adding a couple of additional meeting or study rooms inside the building. And then the partnership with the nonprofit, we're working with, is Beach Inc., and that's Brookings Events, Arts, and Concert Hall Inc. And if anyone has been in this community any length of time, you know that there's been a long-term effort to try to get a performing arts center built. And so there's a really good group of people now who are really dedicated, who are making progress. There's going to be feasibility studies and site surveys and all sorts of things. And the library is committing to pay a portion of that with right now, nothing is in stone, but with the goal of the library owning the space and this nonprofit each managing the space. So the library would be able to use the additional event space and probably meeting room space to expand what we have available here for our patrons. So this $105,000 is some of that, those feasibility studies and the initial work that has to happen before you can build any large scale building. So that's comments on that. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And Tim Rolock of our budget committee is also on the beach board, so he can answer questions as well.
The last comment I would have on this page, and if you look at line 30 on the budget page, unappropriated, the board has looked at the plans for this particular budget and also for future thinking, and has already passed a resolution that we will review this budget every year. 10 years out is just too far to be doing planning with improvement funds. So the board will be looking at it again in 2021, probably in March or April, as we begin the budget process again. The other thing that the board determined is that unappropriated amount. And when you see the word unappropriated, it means you don't touch that unless there were really a dire need of something that came up that you had to. The board cannot use this fund for operating expenses, except they could borrow from this fund if that became necessary. If you borrow, then guess what? You have to pay it back. And that would be the burden for the board if they chose to use any of this unappropriated. So the next time the board looks at this a year from now, it will be important to look what interest added to the principal, and are we going to keep the 949.5, or are we going to allow that interest to grow again? I can't predict 19 years in the future whether it will grow that many years. I can barely predict a year in advance. So before we leave this page, and this budget is one that has had some press and had some questions, so I want to be sure that we're all pretty clear about what we're going to do with it. Anything?
Question. You've got a pretty specific number here, $1,062,311. I know I'm not real clear on how you came up with that. I mean, you do state a roof and carpeting, but you just now, Julie, indicated maybe restructuring the interior.
Yeah, so what Judy was commenting on.
Could you kind of summarize briefly more than carpet and roof, what that $1 million?
Sure, yeah.
Before Julie starts, I would just say it's based on estimates from the interior audit and also from the facilities maintenance review. So looking at both of those costs, and also looking at what is the bottom line that we want to keep in unappropriated. And when you decide that amount, then that leaves you an amount, okay, between these two, this is what we spent. Okay, good.
For the odd amount, yeah.
Sure,
But this is indicating this is this year's budget, you would anticipate
Certainly.
spending
yeah.
over $1
So
million.
the facilities report from Rich Torrey, who is the architect who built the building or designed the building, and the space audit from David with Third Way Inc. So there are pieces that we'll be doing. So carpet, we already went for an RFP, and redoing the entire building is probably gonna be around $100,000.
Yeah.
We have some roof repairs and all sorts of things that need to be done facilities wise. But the bulk of it is going to be an interior renovation. So the main library space is going to be reconfigured. The children's area is going to be made more obviously a children's area with interactive things to do, new furniture. The chairs that we have are really difficult, they're low and hard to get out of. So we're gonna designate a YA space, we're gonna have a couple of new meeting rooms. It's going to be a complete, probably lighting is going to be changed.
Sounds like wall changes.
Yes, some new
and-
additional walls. It may not be built walls, but glass walls. We're still working out the details of all of that.
Okay.
But it is a large scale interior renovation.
Could I add, Julie, that amount must cover absolutely everything associated with doing that?
Mhm.
An RFP,
Architect fees, travel, anything from the
Yeah.
contractors,
Yeah, it's
every
just
last cent.
trying to go through this and understand, and
Sure.
I couldn't really get past carpet and roof, I
Yeah.
guess, and I
Yeah,
thought,
that's good.
I know it's a big building and I know it's a lot of money, but that didn't add up.
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
And after the meeting, feel free to go take a good look at what they did, right? It's very comprehensive and it was really fascinating.
And that is, everything we do is public document, so if that's not already in our online board meeting minutes, then I'll make sure to add it. And again, as Judy said before, we are not following that exactly. There are recommendations made that we won't be doing. There are some things that he didn't mention that we will be doing. The people we're working with are very adaptive and they want us to do what we need to do. But he came and sat for a full day and he watched traffic and walked through the space, and he is trained in marketing and building design. So he kind of watched what people do and talked to library staff and myself to determine what it is that we're lacking that we don't have. So it'll be significant and I'm excited about it. Yeah.
I imagine you are.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. Okay, thanks, Bo.
Good question. Go ahead.
anything else on reserve fund? That means turn the page in your budget message and in your budget. And now we should be on local budget form 20, which is resources. And if you notice in the budget message, I had to say it, the economic impact of COVID-19 is absolutely unknown. Every week I've been listening to a conference call between League Board and cities and a number of city leaders throughout the state. Last week, there were over 400 on the conference call. And all I can tell you is that cities immediately have been impacted. Fees have been non-existent for some things that they're used to. Even though there is federal assistance money, some of that goes to cities, some of it goes to very specific projects that may benefit. So for us, when you look at the resources page, you have to know that our main source of income is property tax. I have no idea how property tax might be impacted for next year. Whether payments are late, whether the assessor gives relief to property taxpayers, whether we have continued development that increases the base, it's just totally unknown. So I fully expect that the board will probably make budget adjustments as time goes by. And for the most part, you see, if you compare the bottom line, clear bottom line, total resources with the past 3 years, current year and past 2 years, it's not quite as much. Part of that is because the cash on hand, how can I explain? That account is a fluid account. Money comes in, money goes out. That's operating every month. So an estimate for interest on that particular fund is pick a number and play the number game and go with it. Estimating previous taxes, line 3 on the top. Yeah, we got that much before. Will we get it again? I don't know. The 325 transfer in from the CD is listed. Under library services line 7, you know that we no longer charge meeting room fees. We do not charge fines. We still charge book replacement. We sell some items. We still do out-of-county library cards and some other things, but we reduce that income. Your guess is as good as mine, what number should be for gifts, grants, or donations. Actually, for the most part, that will be only gifts and donations, because grants are in that other new LB10 now. But that name has to stay there because there's history, and it will stay until that history shows zero. Well, think of it this way, the bookstore has been closed for more than 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Is it 6 weeks yet? Not quite, I don't know.
Not quite, yeah.
Yeah. Friends Library book sale,
Postponed, probably. We're kind of trying to watch what they do with the Azalea Festival, but the current talk is that we'll postpone it till 4th of July weekend, if we can open by then.
so income from those two things for Friends of the Library may look very different than what we've estimated. Then let's go down to taxes, and if you look over on the budget message page, under budget changes, the second item, the Department of Revenue publishes a document. It's show and tell. It's that first document that I have in this budget manual at the very end of the page. They list by county the percent of taxes actually received. So for Curry County this year, it's up to 94%, which is a little bit of increase over 93%. And so the dollar amount in the third line under budget changes that the county assessor lists as the total to be received by our district is $819,727.47. Apply the 94% and you come up with $775.43. And I particularly said that still represents a $49,000 loss. If we got more than 94%, great. But if we don't, then we're that much less than what the total assessed value. The district proposes, and you'll see that page at the end of the budget, to again levy at a permanent tax rate of 0.4256%. Overall, you can see that resources have declined, and that's the way it is. Any comment or questions about resources? Then the last thing I would say on that page is the total resources, $1,410,006. You should be able to find on another page of the budget, if it were right. What I'd like you to do then, if you're in no comments, is actually go to LB 30, and at the top of the page, it should say not allocated. I know that's weird. Why are you going to the end? All on the same page?
There are 2 pages in the LB 30, so if you
Yeah.
look at the first one, flip to the next one.
First one is allocated and the second one is not allocated. And if you look in the proposed budget down to line 29 and 31, and that means you need to look on the page in your budget message that says LB 30 not allocated. With me? I have purposely put the definitions and information about contingency and unappropriated, because when we begin the budget process, one of the first things we say to the board, and when I say we, I include Julie and our bookkeeper, because the three of us work in concert really to develop this document. We recommend to the board what we think the contingency should be and what we think an unappropriated balance should be. Contingency means we can pull from that fund if we need to during the year. By resolution, the board can apply that money to some other line item in the general fund. Unappropriated means, no, you don't touch that, just as it meant don't touch it when we were in reserve fund. That's the amount that we're holding in advance by doing a calculation of what our expenses are each month from July through November until taxes start being paid. We need to be able to use that money for daily operations. So contingency you can touch, unappropriated you can't. And those amounts need to be set, and then that drives the rest of the LD 30. Any questions about that? Okay, flip back to the other LD 30 page. And that means you'll need to flip back in the budget message as well. And we're looking now at LD 30 requirements. Another show and tell, I will just show you that Julie does this really cute color coordinated.
I'm a librarian.
Yeah, color coordinated spreadsheet. Judy, on the other hand, does this kind of stuff. It gets laughed at. I don't care. That's how I do it.
As long as it's done, neither do we.
There you go. Let's look first of all at personnel services, and if you notice, LD 30 is divided into those three sections: personnel, materials, and services, and capital outlay. Under salaries, I just mentioned to you that payroll is direct deposit for all our employees, and there is a bank fee in order to do that. That bank fee is also figured in with salaries. The other thing that's included in salaries and benefits is the fact that there are some other fees that have to do with payroll and benefits. So there is a bit of a buffer in both salaries and benefits. The salary includes a 2% salary increase for our employees. Benefits was kind of a shocker this year because our health insurance package is a 15% increase for those employees that are eligible. Our health insurance is, we have a local insurance agent, but our program is through Special Districts Insurance Services. And the information we received from them was that originally it would have been an 18% increase, and SCIS dipped into their reserve fund to bring it down to a 15%. The reason rates go up is, as you know, if insurance is used, if the investment of those funds doesn't go this way and goes this way, as everything else did, then the amount of money that is left in order to purchase those benefits is less. So it is what it is. When you look at line 5 under personnel services, the total amount is 653, and you compare that with last year or the current year, yes, it shows an increase, but some of that increase is going toward benefits that cost more. Our public employees retirement system, as I've noted, percentages did not increase this year. We do know that they will increase next year because that is on a 2-year cycle. Also, the minimum wage for non-urban areas, which is what we are, increases as of July 1st. Before we leave salaries and benefits, any question about that particular section? Hearing none, let's move on to materials and services. As you can guess by looking at the line items, this is the bulk of monthly expenses. Yes, we will see expenses on a monthly basis now from reserve fund and possibly from the grant fund as well. A couple of things I would point out, not necessarily in the same order that I have them on the budget message. And I'll ask Julie to comment about this too. If you look at subscriptions, we have, CAP has worked diligently to reduce that a bit. Even though subscription prices have increased.
Decrease in magazine costs, and we found, or she found a significant amount that we can cut that aren't being utilized a lot. Increase newspaper costs increase seemingly every year, some significantly each year. So we're canceling those. That's the primary changes. We were going to allow a lot more for Hoopla, our online service, but we decided to scale that back. We increased that a little bit, so.
One of the things that fed into that too is part of the redesign of the interior. Because how that section in the library looks right now may look different,
Yeah, certainly we'll have, I would think, fewer magazine shelving areas. Yeah.
fewer print.
They're just not used as much as they were.
If you would look down at line 13, security, and you'll notice that that is a rather significant increase. Currently, we have night security on a monthly retainer, and because of outside building issues, that became necessary, and we have seen good result. The issue of having the building closed during this time, we've seen, I guess I would say just driving by, Julie could comment about it, but back to the notion of camping on site, back to the issue of people staying here. So it is increasingly important to have somebody, night security.
We've had a few increases and issues here and there. There's not really foot traffic to keep people away or to have staff, multiple staff there all the time to address those issues. So, it is more important at night for sure for us to have someone in place to do that.
Look down at line 22, utilities, and you'll notice that there was an increase for the current year, and we needed to transfer some contingency money in this year. So we left it at 35,000 for next year. And in the budget message, I put a question mark by HVAC. And the reason I did that was to remind me to say, we now have a service contract for the HVAC system, and it's actually operating most of the time. And for a long period of time, it didn't. So yes, utility rates have increased, but it's a little bit early to know. Is it because the HVAC system is operating more efficiently? When Rich did the facilities review, we learned that there was a unit that has been on all the time that feeds just the staff lounge and the 2 adjacent offices. But the 2 adjacent offices have separate heating and cooling units in there. So he said, why do you have that on?
It was just circulating air, which actually led to the unwanted effect of air from the staff bathroom and microwave constantly circulating through Kat and I's office. So who knows how much energy that actual unit was using, but it's off now.
We turned it on.
We turned it off.
Yeah. So that may make a difference too.
Hopefully.
Remains to be seen, but we just felt comfortable that we needed to increase that significantly for the year. If you would look down at line 25, Curry County Library Foundation, I don't know whether we've explained this before, but the 5 libraries in Curry County years ago formed together and became a foundation, a nonprofit foundation. The reason for doing that was to be able to coordinate services, to be able to apply for funding that they might not have been able to as individual libraries. And it played a major role in our being able to partner with Coos County and doing Coastline Network. You'll notice that it is an increase for this year because
well, we have a couple of projects pending. The easiest one to explain is that you may remember that this past year, we added a few databases that were Mango Languages and Chilton Auto Repair. The Curry counties pay for those together, so we get a deep discount, but we pay into that foundation in order to pay that bill. But this coming year, we're also, as a consortium, the entire coastline group is pitching in together to do 2 projects. One is paying for cataloging consultants. I don't know if you search for books often, but you may see there are multiple records for the same book, or it's just confusing sometimes. So actually both of the projects are in relationship to that, to try to clean up the unused records. And the cataloging consultant is to get all of the people who are cataloging in the system on the same page, doing the same thing with the manual, so that we can train people and have more consistency throughout the entire consortium. So those are pending this year.
we should also mention that our library is the largest, serves the largest population of the five. So the percent that we contribute to the foundation is more than others might be
Yeah, we're
because of
the
that.
largest in Curry County, and I think that we're about the same as North Bend. So we're tied for second, or maybe the third largest in the consortium. So we carry significant weight financially because we're in the same consortium as Agnes and tiny little libraries that spend very little each year. So Port Orford, Gold Beach, and Chetco also paid for the databases for all 5 libraries in the county. So we carry a little bit extra that way.
We didn't mention that this fee also covers our portion of the career.
The courier, yeah, and also just, we have to pay annually to be part of the consortium. We pay co-op, our online catalog. So there are several fees in there. They're all necessary.
The last comment that I would make about this section actually applies to total LB 30, and that is back to financial operations. The bookkeeper, Julie, and I both track expenses and invoices and payments on a monthly basis. And actually our payroll is twice a month. So we're actually looking at it 2 times a month. However, I report to the board once a month. We give a financial report, and the board either approves or disapproves or tells me to be quiet. But that's part of our monitoring where we are, how we're doing it, what we're doing. Any comments about materials and services before we move to capital outlay?
I would like to clarify that we never tell her to be quiet.
No, that's true. That's a good clarification for the record. I'll put it in minutes. I just do want to point out, I mean, Judy referenced it, but if you look at the 2 line items from last year to this year, we had to cut quite a bit this year. The budget is tighter. We have less money in order to give staff a 2% raise, and they deserve so much more. But to get to that point even, we had to very carefully trim the fat wherever we could and then some. So these numbers that are lower, those were painstakingly decided. And, you know, we did cut the budgets a little bit for youth and adult programming. For materials, we had to cut several lines. And Kat was very helpful in figuring out where to cut, where we can afford to do that. So even though our bottom line looks significant, it takes money to run a library of this size, and it's tighter this year than it has been since I've been here.
That's why these chicken scratchings are so important.
That's right, they're very important.
Any other comments? Materials and services. All right, moving on to capital outlay. In your budget message, I simply put a definition that capital outlay is this weird thing that, okay, you expect that it's an item that has a value and use for a year or more. But then there's also the dollar value. For the most part, capital outlay for us, as you can see, is furniture and fixtures or books and AV materials. And that's the way the auditor does it. That's the way our bookkeeper does it. So that's how it is in here. You will notice that the cuts that Julie talked about apply to capital outlay as well in books and AV materials, in computer. And the main reason there's a big decrease in furniture and fixtures is because we're using improvement fund to do things inside the library. We did a fair amount of work over in the annex during the current year, so we're not having to do that again. And again, you see the 325 from Meisner children's books in here as well. So, any comment about capital outlay? Okay, this is a test. Do you find $1,410,006 anyplace else in LB 30? Please let it be there. Yes, it's at the bottom of the non-allocated page. So that leaves us almost to the end of this. If you turn to the last page in your budget, in the right-hand corner, it should say LB 50. And it's for 2020, 2021. And you'll notice on the date line, that says June 12th, 2020. That's in anticipation of the board meeting in June, at which point we hope the board will adopt the budget in plenty of time to meet the deadline. The board is proposing, again, as I said earlier, to levy the full tax of 0.425%. And that's how we hope it will be. Any questions about LD 50 or the tax rate?
Is it 0.425 or 4.256?
0.4256.
There has been some attention this past year to the idea of us levying less. The library board did opt to do that in prior years. But if you look at the budget, it's not possible. If we levied less this year, we wouldn't be able to operate with our staff.
Okay, we're ready to move to the epilogue. And I would call your attention to the note at the top of the page. And that requires that this particular committee in Oregon law approve the budget document as it's presented or as revised by this committee. There are specific motions that are required both for the budget and for the tax levy. I have prepared a sample motion if somebody wishes to do them, and I would suggest that you do so that the wording is correct. And the motions and the vote will be recorded in the minutes. The final budget changes, I mentioned already that we are required to have a budget hearing that is currently scheduled for May 22. That does require a quorum of the library board in order to conduct that. Then at the regular board meeting on June 12th, and remember I said there is that period of time between the budget hearing and the June budget meeting, if there are changes that need to be made. And that's not uncommon because sometimes there are corrections in estimates that we thought we did the best we could and we find out something else has changed. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. The requirement is those must not be more than 10% of a particular fund. If they're less than 10%, the board can make those changes and then adopt that budget. And you notice on the budget pages that there is another column for the figures approved by this committee and a final column that is adopted by the board. So then the final things are that this tax certificate, LD 50, needs to be to the assessor's office by July 15th, and then the budget packages go to the county clerk by September 30. And those are complete documents. The assessor really only requires LD 50. And with that, I will be quiet and say thank you to all of you for listening and going through the budget with us.
And we certainly appreciate all the hard work you did, and Julie and Tad and our bookkeeper, everybody that didn't include me.
It includes the board as well, because
You know what I mean.
Things to the board along the way.
Sometimes we look at the big picture and not the nitty gritties of the daily things that need to be done. I appreciate everything that you guys have been doing. Are there any comments, anything anybody wants to say about what we just heard?
Guys online good?
I want to say that was a very complete, thorough review of the budget. I've been involved in a lot of them, and that, that was great.
Yeah.
Lot better than I did.
And this is a simple budget. I just am so glad that we don't have bond issues and a whole bunch of other things that a lot of other local budgets have.
Yeah.
Not fun to do all those. If anybody is interested, I'm sorry for our remote attendees because I can't just hand you a piece of paper, but if anybody wishes to make motions, it is written for you and you can do so.
Ted's volunteering.
Ted's got his hand up right there. The first motion, as you can see, would be to approve the budget as presented.
I move the budget, that the budget committee of the Chetco Community Public Library District approve the budget for the 2020-2021 fiscal year in the amount of $3,554,362.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so,
Then we need to move on to the second motion.
Subsequent motion, I move that the budget committee of the Chetco Community Public Library District approve property taxes for the 2021 fiscal year at the rate of 0.4256% per $1,000 of assessed value for the permanent tax rate levy.
do I hear a second?
Second.
Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Okay, thank you.
I would say that concludes the work of the budget committee, and I would just express thanks again for all of you. I know it's kind of a weird situation this year, but I kind of like remote. Do you? Did it work well for you, Tim and Alita and Dick?
No problem.
Works well for me.
Good.
Well, we appreciate everybody showing up, whether you showed up here physically or not. Thank you all.
I move that we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Fantastic.
This is a
Aye.
thing on You- There's a thing on YouTube for a Zoom meeting where it's actually, it's a bunch of actors who are in a room having